I've always tried to think about what I do, what I produce in terms of art.
Dans une question de l'art.
I'm not interested in simply painting or photographing for art's sake, but in understanding at what point painting or photography is art.
Sont dans le champ de l'art.
Having trained as a photographer, I wanted to see if it was possible to produce photographic objects that would not only be of high quality, technically and plastically speaking, but that would also offer an interesting field of artistic investigation at that time.
Un champ d'investigation artistique intéressant à l'époque.
I went to Spain a lot in those days, and I began to photograph areas outside towns, the outskirts, indefinable landscapes.
J'ai commencé à faire à partir de 1977.
In 1977, I began working on a series of photographs using pack film and a slow shutter speed. I thought if I approached the landscape in an unhurried fashion and looked with both eyes through a large format camera, then the end result would be something far more structured and organized, since this enables one to perceive the initial architecture of the landscape.
Donner dans un résultat final quelque chose qui effectivement était beaucoup plus construit et organisé.
So I decided to use the largest camera available at that time, and I'd walk around the landscape carrying 30 kilos of equipment. I knew that at a given moment I'd have to select a bit of something in the landscape, consider the landscape as matter, as material, and see what I could put together, frame in the shot, in order to achieve this balance that turns a photograph into a picture.
À cet équilibre qui peut porter la photographie au tableau.
When you look at a landscape with your eyes, you tend to focus on one thing. The interesting thing about taking photographs with a large format camera is that the camera does not select. It embraces, it frames, and if you proceed in a certain way, photograph the landscape in a particular type of light, and use a particular depth of field, then none of the subjects in the image, none of the elements forming the image stand out. They cancel each other out and should represent the world. Ideally, these images, these pictures would constitute the world. They would be a sort of idea, object of thought representing the world as a whole. I'm especially fond of this picture because it reflects my initial concerns. In other words, trails, earth, man-made objects. There is a sort of ambiguity here. You have a road that appears to be only half finished, building work that seems to have come to a halt. This is also true of the landscape itself, which, as you can see, has been cut away on the left. You see a sort of stratification, layers of earth and rock. Then, straight away, the greenery. These never-ending rows of trees appear, as they do in most pictures, right in the center of the photograph. All these shots convey an idea of something unstable which is going to change. I really liked what I referred to as my slow snapshots. Despite all the preparation, my photos are rather like snapshots. You have the feeling that at a given moment the image has captured something which is in the process of changing. I chose this place for itself, without the people. Some children were leaving a nearby school, and I was still adjusting my camera to photograph the landscape without the people. All of a sudden, this man appeared on the right, and I took the photo just as he went past. I knew I had to have him in the picture. It was a real revelation because I suddenly saw this man as Pasolini. I've often tried to photograph in a type of light which other photographers try to avoid. The type you get at midday or 2 o'clock in the afternoon when the sun is beating down. When you have shadows, the feel of the photo, the context immediately becomes more dramatic. I wanted to give weight to situations, to landscapes, or to buildings which were seemingly rather trivial.
Cette maison est tellement
This
figée
house is so rigid,
dans sa
so picture
perfection
perfect.
de
The painting, the
construction,
tiles, everything is so neat and well made.
tout est
The
extrêmement
pickaxe becomes a
bien
still
fait.
life element,
La
an
pioche
object you might
devient
find in a
un élément de
traditional
nature
still
morte, comme au
life.
sens d'une peinture classique. Et ce qui fait
As a
qu'au
result,
fond,
the image
après,
itself conveys all
l'image
these
elle-même, elle porte
contradictions,
en elle, toutes
irritations,
ces
attractions,
contradictions et
this
ces
humor as well
énervements,
as
cette
this
séduction,
sadness.
cet humour, et en même temps cette tristesse. Et puis,
Are the
est-ce
houses
que ces
real?
maisons sont réelles?
Perhaps they're
Est-ce que
made
ces
of
maisons
paper.
ne sont pas en
Photographic
grand
paper
papier?
changes the appearance
Le
of
papier
things.
photographique rend quelque
When you look at
chose
this house, you
soi-disant serait
hesitate.
une maison,
You are not really
qui
sure
existe.
whether it is a
Lorsque vous
house.
regardez, vous
I remember how
hésitez.
important it was for me when I
Vous ne
took
savez
all
pas
these
réellement
shots
si c'est une
to know
maison.
that the photographs would be
C'est qu'au
printed in
moment
a
où
particular
c'était
format,
il a toujours
framed
été,
and hung on a wall.
important pour moi de savoir que les photographies que je faisais allaient être tirées à un format précis, être encadrées, être mis sur le mur. Donc la dimension est
So
une
to an
dimension
extent, the
qui a été
dimension was
choisie
determined by the
en fonction
constraints
des
of the paper
contraintes
available at that
de
time.
papier,
In other
etc.
words,
À l'époque,
103 centimeters by 130.
la technologie
With
permet
today's
de faire des
technology, we
photographies
can
plus
produce
grandes,
much larger
130
photographs.
130 centimètres. Ensuite,
After that, I began to
je
explore new ground and started to create sculptures, images,
installations.
installations.
J'avais abandonné la
Having
photographie
given
pendant
up
un certain temps,
photography
et j'ai
for a
eu envie
while, I
de
then
faire
decided to
10
take
tableaux
10 completely different pictures of the same
différents,
place.
pourtant au
Each
même
picture
format,
was
suivant le
taken
même
using the same
dispositif,
techniques
au même
as was in
endroit,
an identical
qui
format.
sont d'une part des photographies
It was the first
verticales,
time I
ce que
had
j'avais
ever
jamais fait
taken
avant.
vertical photographs in which the elements making up the landscape are increasingly absent, and as a result, the photographs are very monochrome.
Profil de photographies qui sont très monochromes. Et cette série
I
de
later
cycles
made
a
use of
d'ailleurs
this
me
cypress
servi
tree series to
ensuite
create works
à mettre en
combining
relation
photographs and
sculpture
sculpture.
et des photographies. C'est la même image.
The
qui est
same
mise
image
dans
appears in a
une boîte à
concrete
béton.
box.
La
This
boîte
box
pourrait
could be
être
opened or
ouverte ou fermée
closed and
et
installed in
installée
any manner of
aléatoire
ways in a given
dans un
space.
espace donné. Ce qui est intéressant,
It is
lorsqu'on ouvre
interesting
la boîte,
because the lid has a very
c'est que
rough
le
texture,
couvercle de la
and so when you
boîte,
open the
dans
box and
lequel
see
sont
the
installées
cypresses
les images du
or a bit of
cyprès,
the sky
le
between the
sol,
trees,
l'apparition
you get
du
the
ciel
impression
dans
you're
le
looking
cyprès
into a
avec comme dans un
well.
puits.
The repetition of the
répétition des
images,
images,
the
et
arrangement of the
ensuite le
objects
rangement
which are
des
superposed and become a piece of
se,
architecture.
superpose et finit par une architecture.
The light series device works extremely well because these photographs are ready-made.
Parce que ces photographies-là sont trouvées petit à petit.
I gradually select a certain
sélectionne
number
un
of
certain nombre de
photographs. I
photographies.
photograph them
Je
again
les
and then
rephotographie
silk screen print
pour
them
les
onto
transférer
plexiglass
en
so they are much
sérigraphie
larger
sur le
and you can
plexiglas,
make out the
donc elles sont
wall on
énormément
which they are
agrandies.
hung.
Et par transparence, on voit le
You have the
blanc
tonality of
sur
the
lequel
ready-made
est
photo as
accroché.
well as a second tonality which
Nous avons
appears with the
la
silk screen
transformation
printing.
dans la photographie trouvée. Nous
It is a
avons
form
deux
of visual
extrêmes
experiment
séparés
based on the
avec
structure of the
la
tonality in
séparation.
relation to the wall's
Donc,
texture,
nous sommes dans
which
une
reveals the
expérience
image.
visuelle
It is somewhat
de
ambiguous
structure
since
de
it
la
is not
trame
clear
en
whether it is a
relation avec la
photograph
texture
or a
du
piece of
mur
sculpture.
qui révèle
I personally
l'image.
consider these
On a
works
là
to be
un
sculptures
lieu,
rather than photographs.
qui est aussi dans cette ambiguïté de l'objet, de la photographie et de la sculpture. Je considère ces pièces d'ailleurs plus comme des sculptures que comme des photographies. Dans la première
In
lumière,
the first light, the arm
le
switches
bras
on a wall
allume
lamp which
une
produces a halo.
qui produit un halo.
This halo highlights the wall, so it is a way of saying we light
C'est
the
une façon
wall.
de dire nous allumons le mur. Par la suite, on
In the
verra
other
dans
lights, you
les
can see how the choice of
lumières,
windows and
le
shafts of
soir,
light
les fenêtres,
serves to emphasize the
qui
wall.
permet de mettre en avant le
This is
mur.
also a way of saying we find these photos which are our memories, but these memories are reactivated by the wall of the place in which we are.
Activés par le mur du lieu dans lequel on se trouve. Par exemple, ici.
Here, for example, in the foreground, you have a swimming pool with the sky reflected in it. The sky becomes a bottomless well, and in our device, this bottomless well is the wall.
C'est le mur.
A recollected image is projected in the background. This is represented by the circle of children, which appears to be a collage. In my most recent works, which are called panoramas, I decided to use the same techniques as in the lights series.
Le même système que le système des lumières.
These drawings are photographed and they become a film. This film is printed onto plexiglass and it becomes this ambiguous object, which is an enlarged drawing. When displayed on the wall, the drawings themselves seem to be quite ambiguous hybrid objects. They're rather like a skin, a reference to the photograph as a sensitive surface. All this experimentation, this gradual progression, has led me to create mixed works in which I make plastic and visual experiments that complement one another. In 1996, I returned to professional photography in a somewhat unexpected way. During a trip to Argentina, I took a certain number of photographs simply for pleasure. These photographs follow on from each other, but there is no particular narrative or story. I decided not to disclose where the photographs were taken. What I wanted to do was to create a visual walk through the world. These places were chosen for very specific reasons. They are linked to my own life, to particular events which take me from one city to another. The series is also a visual experiment on a stratification of the image in the city, with the effect produced by the colors, but also the matter, the nature, the architecture, and the vibration of the whole. By not naming these places, I'm also commenting indirectly on the loss of identity. However, I try to produce a precise, accurate picture of the world and also to create a distance from the viewer in the hope that he will make the work his own, interpret what initially appears to be a rather fragile work in his own way. It is fragile because it does not demonstrate anything. For me, the important thing in these groups of photos and in the sculptures is the physicality of what is there. It is there for the person looking at it. It is necessary to define more clearly the usefulness of art today by looking at the possible relationship of the viewer with a thing serving no purpose. This is how I would define art. It makes life easier. That's all.